the most wonderful time of the year. Yeah, right. How about there'll be families of fighting and kids rude and whining, so call your therapist now. That's what it should be. You know, if I could just find somebody who doesn't have a problem, then maybe this would be easier. But then again, people wouldn't need licensed mental health counselors. That wouldn't work either. I had to find a new occupation at that point. Whew. But seriously, if I could just find one person who had a great marriage, great career, great life, great everything, it'd be so easy to counsel them, right? I'm just listen, oh yeah, great. Then gain $90 and send them on their way. That'd be so nice. Anyways, it's almost 11 o'clock. Time for my next appointment. Let's see who's on the schedule today. I'm coming. Here goes. I'm coming. I should probably be nice. Yeah. Hi. Got to get that door oiled. Come on in for a second. Come on in. All right. If you could why don't you just have a seat right here in the comfy chair? Yeah, that'd be great. And I'm just gonna kind of move right over here just for a little bit, and maybe we can just kind of look at each other. That would be great. Thank you. Would you like some coffee or tea or water? No? Okay, you're good. That's great. I probably should introduce myself. My name is Dr. Pointer. And great to have you with me today. And just really, again, just make yourself comfortable here. Excuse me? Can you call me Paul? Sure, you can call me Paul. Nobody's ever asked that before, but sure, 8 years to get this jacket, but no problem. Go ahead and call me Paul. That's perfectly fine. First of all, I think I just need to apologize because you've been waiting here in the waiting room for quite some time, and I truly am sorry about that. And so, again, my apologies. I appreciate your patience and not complaining like the last patient, and so that's very, very nice of you. I'm just kind of glancing over your chart here, and I noticed that you have had an appointment scheduled with me for over 3 months. 3 months, and just to let you know, before we kind of get started here, that in the future that you don't have to wait for me, but any one of my other colleagues are very capable to handle any issue that you have. We are all licensed mental health counselors, all have doctorate's degree in psychiatry. We can prescribe any medication that you may need to bring you back into balance. And so, seriously, if any one of my colleagues will be sure to help you. You know, and that sounded kind of weird, didn't it? Like you're only here for a prescription. And I really didn't mean that. I wasn't really insinuating that at all. I'm just honestly just glad you're here. And I hope that we can chat and I can in some way help you to feel a little bit better. But anyways, seriously though, just keep that in mind that anyone can be happy to help you and not just me, right? Excuse me? Oh, you wanted to specifically speak with me. Okay, well, no problem. Then we are here, and let's get started. And I'm so excited that we are here to chat today. I want to appreciate your encouragement for that, too. That means a lot, because with a practice of 4 or 5 of us, it means a lot that you would like to speak specifically to me, and so thank you. And I probably should have made it a point to kind of squeeze you in, but it's been so hectic, as you can know, around the Christmas season. It's just crazy. And personally, my wife and I have had some challenges that we've been trying to work through, some family issues lately. And with Christmas coming around the corner, the in-laws flying in from Detroit, it's just kind of heightened everything, if you know what I mean. So it's just a little bit crazy. And so I'm just being truthful with you that I just kind of at this time feel a bit stressed, and so I've been kind of cutting down the client load quite a bit. In fact, cutting the client load in half. You know, I'm doing it again. You came to talk to me, and here I am just kind of spilling my guts to you. So maybe I should pay you, shouldn't I? And I really don't mean to do that. I'm rambling again. That's really so unprofessional of me to do. Here I am telling you my problems, and maybe we could just start over. Click, and let's just kind of start over and just kind of have another fresh start. But before we do, really quick, just to clarify kind of what I was saying, there seriously is just something about this time of year. I think Christmas, can certainly be the most wonderful time of year, but for many people, it can also be extremely difficult, at least for many of my clients. I think this season has a way of kind of highlighting some of the difficulties that some of my clients have been through, specifically those who maybe have lost a loved one. Christmas has a way of highlighting that open seat around the table, if you know what I mean. Kind of reminding those people of what they've lost. And so some of my clients kind of deal with some of that. And then this season, with all of its celebrations and dinners and all the work parties and things that I'm sure you're familiar with, and all of those things that are going on, it seems like, ironically, all the busyness can somehow just intensify the loneliness. You know what I mean? Reminding you of maybe all those who aren't present in your life, and maybe some that you really wish were present in your life and they no longer are. And so many of my clients are kind of struggling with some of these challenges. And I'll tell you, my phone is just ringing off the hook. It's ringing off the hook. And I try to do my best to help and to counsel, and it looks like that everybody's just searching for some wonderful counselor, right, to give them some great advice to kind of help them through the season. And honestly, I just can't keep up with all the needs. Can't. In fact, my last client, really quick, if I just tell you this, and then we'll get started in just a minute. My last client, who was just sitting there, right there in that very chair, reclining, and just kind of enjoying some coffee, and we were just kind of talking, and I was just kind of listening. It seemed like the season of Christmas for him just kind of reawakened really all sorts of conflict that he had been having with his family. Isn't that strange? I mean, that a happy time like this would reawaken conflict for him because of what he was experiencing with his family and had experienced with his family in some time. And it just kind of surfaced all back to the top again. You see, my last client, really quick, his brother and he kind of had this big fallout. And when I was listening to him, he was telling me that 8 years ago, his brother was struggling, and he had told his brother, this is all he said. He said, in fact, I'll read the notes. He said, because I wrote it down. He goes, all I told my brother, he said, I knew my brother had an addiction that was beginning to take over his life. And he goes, all I told him was, I'm praying for you because I know this addiction is beginning to take over your life. That's all he said. I mean, that kind of sounds pretty caring if you ask me, but his brother gets angry. His brother shares a few choice words and then storms out, and he's never seen him again since. 8 years. It's crazy. The 15 years that I've been doing this, what I'm learning is that a lot of hurt people like to hurt people. A lot of hurt people. So he hasn't seen his brother for 8 years. And I just can't fathom that this little tiny rift can't be kind of reconciled or healed. It just blows me away. I mean, I have a brother, and we haven't spoken for 3 years. Anyways, I'm doing it again, and I want to apologize. Kind of monologuing again, and really don't mean to do that. Maybe there's just something in this coffee, or maybe there's just something about you. I don't know what it is. And here I just broke HIPAA law. I mean, I'm not even supposed to be sharing with you about my other clients, but I am, and I am seriously, here at my practice, we pride ourselves in confidentiality, and we really do. And so, sir, please forgive me, and at least I didn't mention his name. What's that? How did you know his name? You spoke with him earlier. You know, before we get started with our session, can I just get your name? I'm not sure if I look here on my notes that I have it accurate on my chart. Yeah. Yeah. Jesus? Emmanuel? And you will be called Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Jesus, I'm tired. Can I just maybe move a little closer if I could for a few minutes? Because I got some problems that just maybe you could help me with. I feel I need to lean into your presence lately because there's just a lot of heavy things on my shoulders. Some family things. And maybe I could just share some of that with you today. Jesus, thank you for your patience with me, for your kindness. I could sure use a wonderful counselor, somebody to share. Sometimes I feel stuck. Sometimes I don't know what to do. Sometimes I feel lonely. And right now, that's how I feel, Jesus, and I feel like I just need you, my wonderful counselor. So I'm all ears. Merry Christmas. Good to see everybody here. And as you can see, I'm wearing red today, celebrating Christmas, and lots of red in the house. And so we're thankful for that. And good to have you here with us. We're going to continue kind of our therapy session, if you will, with Jesus before we go home, because I didn't want to leave you with angst. So I feel like we just need to kind of tie some loose ends up here as we kept really continuing our series that we've been studying together. We've been studying the names of Jesus as given by God the Father himself through the prophet Isaiah that we've been reading in Isaiah chapter 9. We take this as a prophecy for the foretelling of the birth of Jesus Christ. That's why we kind of celebrate Advent, because, that's why we've been looking at Isaiah 9, because of this prophecy. Isaiah gives us these 4 specific names or titles, or you could say attributes or characteristics that would characterize the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. Let's read Isaiah chapter 9 and kind of look back or catch up here where we left off. We're not going in any specific order. Maybe you've kind of caught that, but let's see where we are at today. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called, say it with me, those 4 names, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. The good news is that God sent Jesus into the darkness of our world as the Wonderful Counselor. That's the name that we will focus on today. Remember, this passage that we studied several weeks ago was written about 800 years before Jesus' birth, and these names that are written in Isaiah really help to describe for us the purpose of his coming. The people, if you remember, who were given this promise in the context of Isaiah 9, again, if you want to repeat that or go back over that sermon 2 weeks ago, you can kind of find that back on YouTube. But the people who were given this promise in the context of Isaiah 9 are in a time of lots of deep struggles, lots of deep hurts, political darkness, financial issues. The people of Judah were under the reign of King, anybody remember his name? Wow, that's good. Way to go, Paul. King Ahaz was his name. And if you remember in Isaiah chapter 7, you can flip over there at some point and you can look at the very first few verses of Isaiah 7. And at the beginning of that chapter, we read that we read about King Ahaz, and it says that they were shaking as trees in a forest, or shaking as trees in a forest are shaken by the wind. So it's a very scary time in the context that all of this is written that we see here in Isaiah 9. People were afraid. There was their fear, though, you could say, was faithless, and they were not thinking to turn to their sovereign God. That was kind of the problem that was happening here. They weren't turning to God for their protection. Sometimes we do that when we get scared. We turn to other things in order to get the help that we need rather than turning immediately to God. And instead, Ahaz made some very poor decisions, ultimately brought ruin upon himself and struggle for God's people. We learned that it's in the struggle of our waiting and in the moments of our crises that our true faith is revealed. And maybe God allowed this crisis to happen within Ahaz's life in order to maybe force him into a time of waiting to show him just how empty his soul was without his great God. And unfortunately for Ahaz, he failed the test. And Ahaz continued to trust in himself and his resources around him rather than his God. Sounds like, again, a lot like us. And in this context, the people were crying out for some kind of deliverance from the armies that literally were at their gates, surrounding them and ready to destroy them. And in response to their cry, God promised a Messiah, a Savior that would come, who would be Wonderful Counselor. And these are the words, again, that we read in the beginning. These are the words that was read in all of that context of what's happening. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. But here's the problem. That Messiah wouldn't show up on the scene for several hundred years later, 800, right? So how does that help? And how did that help Ahaz in that particular time of what they were experiencing? God was not only showing them that he wanted to deliver them from an invading army that would only be superficial or temporary relief, but God was showing them that he wanted to cure their problems at their source. And that source was their sin, and that sin was created from that sin creates a separation from God. Now, I think it's important for us to also be clear that God also, he did give them financial help, did give them military help throughout their lives and through their immediate needs, but it wasn't always peaches and cream for God's people. And God worked miracles in their midst plenty of times because God also cares about the here and now. But it's important to know that God, his primary concern at that time was for their ultimate salvation and reconciliation to him. That was his primary concern. Because our problems ultimately all stem from our separation from God. You name it, any problem that you and I have that you're dealing with even quite possibly right now, all of those problems, relational issues, work problems, financial issues, in all of those circumstances, they all stem from our separation from God, from sin. They all stem from the sin of selfishness or the sin of pride. And so we're broken, and so we're hurt, and so then we hurt others. And so if it's not caused directly from your sin, then quite possibly it's caused directly by someone else's sin, and you just happen to be on the receiving end of that. And God knew that until we address that sin, separation from God problem that we all have, that all of our other solutions are only superficial and they're all only temporary. So today we look at this beautiful name, Wonderful Counselor. Out of all of the four names, this one is by far, hands down, my favorite. It's my favorite of all the four names. I have just loved this name, I think, from the moment that I heard it, probably because of how I'm wired. But as I've studied it this week, I have even felt more in love with this name and more in love with Jesus. And I hope that as we go through this name that you too will understand a little bit more about what Isaiah wanted you to know about this wonderful counselor. We've been reading in the book of Hebrews. If you're following in our Anchored series, then we're still in Hebrews right now. And Hebrews recently, I came across Hebrews chapter 4. And I'm going to read a few verses for you in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 14 through 16. And it says this: "Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need." Isn't that beautiful? Jesus is not some distant, far-off Savior who doesn't understand what you and I go through in life. This passage says he is not unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but he himself has experienced life on our level in every way. He has faced all the temptations that you and I have faced, but the difference is that he has remained faithful. He led a sinless life, but he remained faithful in every moment of his life. And the best kind of counselor is one who understands, isn't it? Best kind of counselor is one who says, I get it. I've been there. I've walked through that. And because of this, we can now approach God's throne of grace, Hebrews 4 says, with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. The writer of Hebrews believed that Jesus sat and still sits on a heavenly throne and that he is God himself. And what is so encouraging here in this passage as I read it is that he is not, again, distant, far removed from us. He doesn't shake his head and look down on us from up high whenever we make a mistake and just looks at the mess that we are in this crazy world. He doesn't tisk us whenever we make a mistake, but he's always there, always ready, always willing to counsel us when we need it. We're learning that Advent is this time to celebrate God who became human. It's Jesus. It's God with skin, as we like to say around here. Jesus was born in poverty, who knew what it was like to be tempted, who knew what it was like to be rejected, who knew what it was like to be lonely and hungry. In other words, he is the God who knows what it's like to be us, because he's been there. He walked through pain and suffering just like we do, except his pain and suffering was far worse than we could ever imagine. So he's the wonderful counselor, who's also the most reliable counselor to help us navigate the worst kinds of pains and the worst kinds of situations. Jesus is uniquely qualified to be your counselor, and I think right away we need to get that one out. He's uniquely qualified to be your counselor. And I want you to know, when we hear this word counselor, don't just think therapist. It's much more than a therapist. So I want to take a closer look at this idea of what this name means that Isaiah shared with us, this name, Wonderful Counselor. And if we look at it here in a second in the original Hebrew language, I think it's going to kind of shed some light on what this word means and I think what Isaiah meant when he was telling us about this Jesus. There's two words, and we're going to kind of break them up. Wonderful is this Hebrew word Pele. Everybody say Pele. Pele. And counselor looks like Yahwetz. Yahwetz, or you're wet, but it's kind of Yahwetz. Okay, think of that, okay? So everybody say, Pele Yahwetz. Wonderful counselor. That's how you say it in Hebrew. The word Pele, translated wonderful, means beyond understanding. It means beyond understanding, or we could say too wonderful for words to describe. Isaiah said that when the Messiah comes, he would be beyond our words to describe him. That's what Isaiah says. He'll be beyond our words to describe him. Yahwetz translates as counselor. It means one who instructs or guides from a position of authority. This kind of counselor is not like the friend you call up late at night and you just kind of tell them you're having a rough night and you can't sleep and your life's falling apart and your kids are a wreck and you go on and then that person on the other end of the phone says, "Oh, I'm so sorry that's happening to you." And and they begin to kind of help you just a little bit and encourage you. And that's all great and fine, and we need those kinds of people in our life who just kind of empathize with us, and that's important. But this counselor in Isaiah 9 is someone who you can bring your worst problems to, and he can show you the way out of them because he has the authority over them. So this counselor doesn't just empathize, but this counselor instructs or guides from a position of authority because he has the authority over all of the problems that you and I are dealing with right now. Yawetz also means this. It means someone who has the experience to understand the situation, the wisdom to work out the solution, and the power to enact it. When I was this week kind of studying for this, just yesterday kind of going over my notes and getting some things in order, right at this moment, as I was working through this part in my sermon, I got a phone call. And the phone call was from my cousin. Those of you who have social media, you probably saw the post that we recently put as we're really just asking for prayer for my cousin Paul. Paul and his wife Tammy kind of moved from Georgia recently and several months ago and been a part of our church ever since and just really getting plugged in. And God's just been using them in some pretty cool ways. And they're just really excited to be here in Florida. And we're excited to have them, more family in Florida as well for us, the Pointer family. And my phone rang, and I knew that he was in the hospital. I knew that he was having some struggles, but I just didn't know how bad it was. And so he called to give me an update. And each day we've been kind of talking and kind of getting those updates. But when I talked with him at this moment, he said, apparently I'm not as good as I thought I was. He's been in the ER. He went to the ER last week, and almost been a week now that he's been in the hospital. He's now in ICU, and he's literally fighting for his life. He has COVID-induced pneumonia. And doctors tell him that these next 2 days are absolutely crucial for him as his lungs are beginning and hopefully continuing to heal. But as of now, they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And he just kind of began to share some of the challenges that he's in. And when you're hit with that kind of phone call, you always feel like you got to have the right words to say, don't you? And sometimes you don't have to have any words. What I tell people is sometimes people just need a person just to listen to. So I tried to listen, but tried to also be a pastor and offer some kind of hope and just to pray with him, in which I did. And I shared with him some of the things that I had been learning literally at that very second when he called me. That the God that I serve, the wonderful counselor, is fully aware of the problem that Paul is being faced with right now. He knows the situation, and he doesn't want to just empathize with Paul, but he can literally enact in powerful ways to miraculously heal Paul of what's happening within Paul's life as well. And so we're reminded of that truth, and we're hanging on to the truths of who God is. And we're praying that if it be God will, that God might begin to heal his lungs over these next 2 days. Isaiah says, this is the wonderful counselor who rescues you. This is the wonderful counselor who delivers you. This is the wonderful counselor who has the power to do what he says he's going to do. And this wonderful counselor, I'll sit in any waiting room to see. I don't care if it's 3 hours, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 years, right? Because we all want to know what he has to say. And he has the authority over all things, and so we wait for his perfect timing. I find it interesting that in Psalm 119, if you recall just our last sermon series, we went through the chapter, Psalm 119, and when I was researching the times that this word wonderful or Pele is referenced in the Old Testament, Psalm 119 is one of those references. Your statutes are Pele. Your statutes are wonderful, therefore I obey them. Remember when we studied Psalm 119, we went through that. And the psalmist says, your word, O Lord, is wonderful. It is beyond understanding, too wonderful for words. And this is why the psalmist chooses to follow the written word of the wonderful counselor, because the words of the wonderful counselor always lead to life, right? This word Pele is used about 15 total times, that at least that I counted. There's some debate, 14, 15 or so, just in the Old Testament. in, again, the original Hebrew language. And there's something that I found fascinating is that more often than not, out of these 15 times that this word Pele or wonderful is referenced in the Old Testament, it is referred to something that is miraculous or something that is supernatural. Something miraculous or something that is supernatural. It refers, in more cases than not, to something that exceeds our expectations. The first reference, just to take that as an example, which I'll share with you, is in Exodus chapter 15. And it revolves around this idea of the miraculous. And here, if you were to remind yourself of what the context here is within Exodus chapter 15, some call it the Song of Moses. The context here, if you back up just the chapter, God is working miracles in his people's lives and certainly within Moses. And after the children of Israel cross over the Red Sea on dry land, and then the waters, if you remember, recede back over Pharaoh and his people. And again, that's chapter 14. That's all that's happening. And so all that took place, and Moses tells the people in chapter 14, do not be afraid. The Lord will fight for you. You only need to be still. That's what it says. I love that. And God miraculously rescues his people from their problem. And then we read this in this verse in chapter 15, the very next chapter, in what again is called the Song of Moses. Who among the gods? Now, when you see a little g like this is idols, not the real God that we worship. That God is listed as a capital G. So who among the false gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working Pele, working miracles, working wonders? And I think when we understand that, it helps us, when we understand this word, that it's going to help us to better comprehend what Isaiah wants us to know about wonderful counselor. God is better than any therapist. He's the type of counselor that will not just be comforting presence or an encouraging word, but if you heed his counsel, he will lead you to the miraculous. Isn't that awesome? He doesn't just give you good counsel. He doesn't just give you something that will help you get by or survive or prescribe something that will help you feel better temporarily. But the type of counsel that Jesus is the wonderful counselor. And what he gives will far exceed our expectations. And the result of following God's counsel will lead to miraculous results. He gives you wisdom. When you're faced with a decision that's beyond your abilities to know what to do. How many of you, just think about this, don't need to answer, are being faced right now with a decision and you have no clue what you're going to do? Think about it. I got a few on my plate too. If we follow the advice of the wonderful counselor, and his counsel will far exceed our expectations. He gives you guidance when you don't know where to turn. He gives you encouragement when you feel all alone. He gives you counsel when you don't know what to do. He brings about healing when nothing else seems to work. He brings about peace when you feel you're in the midst of chaos, and his counsel will far exceed your expectations. J.D. Greer, in his book, Searching for Christmas, which has been kind of a resource that I've been kind of gaining some information from, he says this. He says, Isaiah wasn't saying that Jesus would be a great listener, though he was, or know exactly what questions to ask, though he did. No, he's talking about somebody to whom you can bring your worst problems, and he can show you a way out. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to go with 3 other men on a missions trip to Haiti, and here's a picture of those 3 men. One is including myself. You can see who I am. That's the younger me. The guy in the middle, you know, Rick, who plays acoustic guitar, and the guy on the far right is Pastor Mark, who plays the drums. And we all had this awesome opportunity to go on this missions trip to Haiti, and we really didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, but honestly, we loved every minute of it as we were able to help one of our Haitian churches there kind of physically build their church. Now, I don't speak Creole, and neither does Rick or Mark, and so that was a bit of a struggle for us, but we had our pastor friend Desir, or some call him Desi. And Desir is one of our pastors in Miami of one of our Haitian churches. And so Desir was kind of our guide throughout that week. Everywhere we went, we followed Desir. We did everything that Desir told us to do because we just knew that we had to. Some moments we were it was a little nerve-wracking, and Desir continued to guide us through every single part of that trip. We were traveling on a homemade boat for several hours that had a billboard vinyl side for a sail, but we followed Desir's advice. There were rough waters on the way back where they said between 7 and 8 capping. That's huge on a homemade boat. We were a little nerve-wracking, but we trusted Desir. This is a picture of Mark getting sick on the boat. Rick was also sick, but I don't have a picture. I couldn't find the picture of him, and I don't want to embarrass him. So anyways, after we continued to travel, we get back. We're on the island of Tortuga. We travel back to mainland Haiti, and now it was time for us to get back on a bus and travel 7 hours back to Port-au-Prince in order to catch our flight. But for some reason, Desir thought that we needed to leave a day early. We trusted Desir, and we're very glad that we did, because when we finally arrive on mainland, it was the information was given to us that they decided to sell our bus tickets because they can do that. And so they sold our bus tickets, and we no longer had a 7-hour bus ride back to Port-au-Prince in order to catch our plane. And so during that time, Desir was busy at work speaking Creole to people all around him, and we're just sitting there like, we really hope we can get on a bus. And Desir's working his magic, and he comes back, and he's like, see this blue truck? Get on it. That's our ride back to Port-au-Prince. So we loaded up on the back of this blue truck, and we started our journey back to Port-au-Prince. Halfway through, we had to stop because it became nighttime. That's when this picture was taken, and Desir knew that it was too dangerous for us to travel at that time, and so we stopped at a hotel. It was during that time that I was having dinner with Desir, and I kind of asked Desir as we kind of sat down together, and I said, so how do you know this young man and his girlfriend who are willingly taking us on this blue beat-up Toyota truck, 7 hours to Port-au-Prince? And he's like, I don't know him from anybody. I'm like, you what? He's like, I've never met him before, except back when we first got off the boat. I saw them and I said, hey, can you take me and my friends 7 hours to Port-au-Prince? And he agreed, and I paid him money. I'm like, wow. We were nervous, but we continued to trust Desir every step of the way, and he guided us. We didn't know the language, we didn't know the terrain, we didn't know the people, but Desir was our faithful guide to help us safely through our problems. This is the kind of counselor that Jesus offers to be for each of us. We don't know the terrain, we don't understand the depth of our problems, we don't know what to say, and our wonderful counselor says, I got it. I got it. I'll show you quick 2 more pictures. This is when a part of, what's this called? The steering axle, something like that, broke, and they repaired it with a piece of rope. We'll get there. Anyways, and that got us through another 4 hours, and we trusted Desir. What I'm learning is that every miracle that Jesus performed started with a problem. When Isaiah spoke his prophecy in Isaiah 9, he speaks about Jesus' birth, and he declares to the world that Jesus came for people who have problems. Jesus came for people who have problems. He didn't just come to award the righteous or crown the victorious. He came to heal the weak, heal the wounded, the sick, and the lonely. And every miracle that Jesus performed started with a problem. I encourage you at some point, maybe go back through the Gospels. It might be a fun little thing for you to do, and just kind of come across those miracles again and just kind of read the context surrounding those miracles, and you will see that every single one of them started with a problem. Jesus' miracles were not magic tricks that he just whipped up in order to impress the crowd or somehow mesmerize the people who were following him, but every miracle that he performed was for a purpose. He healed blindness, cured sickness, calmed storms, multiplied food for the hungry, raised the dead, and on and on and on miracles took place. Every miracle that Jesus performed started with a problem. Blindness, disease, exclusion, hunger, even death. And each time Jesus entered into that problem using his wonderful, miraculous power. There's great news in this. And the great news is that if you have a problem, then you are a candidate for a miracle. The bad news is no problem, no miracle. I'm just curious how many of you don't answer out loud as we started this morning in our monologue. How many of you have a problem that right now is just a little bit too, you don't need to answer, but it's a little bit too big for you to handle, and again, you just don't know what to do? The great news is that you are a candidate for a miracle today. Bad news, for those of you who maybe this morning said, man, my life's perfect, I don't have any problems. Then no miracle for you, I'm sorry. It's not going to happen in your life. So maybe for you, you might just want to, after church, gather your friends and pray that God may give you some problems, and so you can experience some miracles in your life, and so you too can be a candidate for a miracle. But for those of you with problems, like I have problems, and those of you who are with me today, then you're good to go. Then you're a candidate. You're ready. And Jesus is the wonderful counselor. He promises you wisdom to the confused. I'm guessing that in some of these problems, they're pretty big. I wish I could read some of the bubbles that pop up from your head like a cartoon. It'd be awesome. My guess is that for some of you are confused and you need wisdom. He'll give us wisdom. Some of you are weak, maybe physically. You've been battling some kind of illness or sickness. You're not here today because you're watching online, and you need some physical strength. He gives support to the weak. He gives strength for the weary. He promises to never leave us or forsake us. It's a promise that we read within Scripture. He promises to work relentlessly in all things for our good and for his glory. In all of these miraculous events that Jesus was a part of, there were only, as I see it, 3 qualifications that people needed in order to know the power of the wonderful counselor. If you're taking notes, I would take notes because I would want to know the answer to this too. So in all of these miraculous events that Jesus was a part of that happened over the Gospels when Jesus was here, there were only 3 qualifications people needed in order to know or experience the power of the wonderful counselor. And here are those 3 qualifications to experience the power of the wonderful counselor. That's just another way that we could say no problems, no miracle. No problems, no miracle. We'll skip that. That's just kind of a fun side note for you. Anyways, we'll come back to this. 3 qualifications in order to experience the power of the wonderful counselor. Number 1, you need to know that you have a problem. I think there's a lot of people who have problems, but they don't want to admit they have problems. We call this authenticity. It's something that we value within our church family. We value authenticity. Until you are completely open and transparent with your problems, the wonderful counselor can't help you. Imagine all of the other times in Scripture when Jesus encountered somebody who had a problem. Imagine if they didn't come asking Jesus for help, where would they have been? Where would it have gotten them? And so until you are exposed in his presence, Jesus may not heal your problem. So the safest place in all of the universe is to be completely exposed in the presence of Jesus. 2, you need to know that you can't fix them. We call this humility. And so we move from authenticity to humility. Humility says, I can't fix my own problem. When we begin to think that we can fix our own problem, we call that the sin of what? Pride. And we begin to think that we have everything figured out when we really don't. And so number 2 is you need to know that you can't fix them. Practice humility within your life. Number 3, you need to know that Jesus can transform them. We call this faith. You have the kind of faith that says, I believe that Jesus can do miracles, that he can do amazing things within my life, and I'm going to trust that he's going to do powerful things, but I'm also going to trust that it's going to be in his timing. And I'm also going to trust that it's going to be in his way. Because the things that you think might be miracles, Jesus might be saying, no, I don't want to do that within your life, but I want to do something else within your life. But it'll still lead to results that will far exceed our expectations. So I come back to the question, what's your problem? This Christmas season is a strange one. It's again, like we said in the monologue, it's just kind of full of joy and celebrations, and kids get together and they're so excited, can't wait to open gifts, and we watch reruns of It's a Wonderful Life and Home Alone 1, 2, 3, and I think 4 is out there. And, we have all these things, yet at the same time, in the midst of all the perceived joy, for many of us, it's the time we find it hardest to bury our struggles or ignore our problems or regrets. So although You can put on a great Christmas facade. You are breaking under the burden of something that you just can't cope with. Maybe you don't have any loved ones near you this year. Or maybe, again, the seat at the table is empty, reminding you of your loss. Jesus, the wonderful counselor, gets it. He gets it. Jesus didn't come for people who have it all together. He came for people with problems. He came for people whose lives are dysfunctional. He came for families that are messed up. He came for the hurting, the sick, the mistreated, the abused, the lonely, the brokenhearted, the neglected. He even came for those who seem to appear to have everything in life that they could dream of, but realize that they still haven't found what they're looking for. So the question might be today is, can Jesus fix my problem? Can he fix my marriage? Can he fix my family, my career? Can he make me happy again? The answer is yes. The wonderful counselor, Jesus Christ, can help you with all of your problems if you're willing to listen to his counsel, look for his transforming power, and I think this third one is the biggest. Accept that he may say things that are different than how you've been figuring life out up to now. So again, the miracle in your life may not be what you think it should be, but just trust and accept that he gets it, that he knows what's best within your life. When you come to know Jesus, he gives you something far greater than just answers to your problems. But what I'm learning is that he gives you himself. Or as we're learning, he gives you this idea, this word, Emmanuel, right? God with us. And who he is even better than what he does. J.D. Greear, I'm going to put this quote on the screen. He says this again in this chapter of Wonderful Counselor. He says, you may be looking for a solution. God gives you something even better, a relationship with him. Life's greatest discovery is knowing Jesus, knowing he loves you, knowing his promise to be ever present in your life, knowing that he promises to work all things out according to a plan that is bathed in love and executed in power. This discovery doesn't take away all of your problems, but it does completely change how you go through them. When we were in Haiti, we had lots of problems, and the problems weren't being resolved. They weren't necessarily being fixed, but it's how we experienced those problems that got us through, and that we really weren't concerned, because God was doing that throughout that trip the entire time, and we trust that God continues to work that way in our lives today. So how can Jesus help you today? As we close, I just kind of want to give a time of silence, because you know your problems more than I know what your problems are. And I just want us to kind of take a moment of silence as the band kind of comes up, and they're going to kind of lead us in a closing song. But we're going to give you just honestly a time of a few minutes where I just want you to be quiet. And I want you to pray and to ask Jesus to help you with whatever it is that you might be dealing with today. I want you to pray that you will listen to his counsel. I want you to pray that you will look for his transforming power. And I want you to pray that you will learn to accept that he may say things that are different than how you've been figuring life out up to now. So come to him authentically, with transparency. Come to him with humility and faith. So we first are going to admit the struggle that we're going through. If you've already shared this with him, it's okay. He loves it when you sit with him and when you share with him. And it strengthens your relationship as you do that. Know that you can't fix them, but know that Jesus can, in his timing, in his way, and in his will. And if we could, this is something that we like to do within our church periodically, is we just kind of take our hands, and I just like this symbol. You don't have to do this, but it's something that I really appreciate is in my prayer life sometimes is I just take my hands and I just open them up and I just kind of lay them open on my lap. And it's kind of just this symbol of us saying that our hands are open this morning to really want to listen to what the wonderful counselor has to tell us. And so we just want to have our hands open, want to have our ears open and our hearts open to listen to what the wonderful counselor wants to tell us. I want to remind you too what Hebrews 4 says, that when we come to him and we pray, that we're not shouting across some great chasm in hopes that he's going to hear us, that God is not some faraway, distant God who is only there at some moments, but according to Hebrews chapter 4, we can approach his throne with confidence. Hebrews 4 says that we can come to his throne of grace. It's another way of saying that we are coming to the throne of God, and we can come boldly and confidently. And this is not in arrogance, by the way. It's not coming with great arrogance that he's going to show up and do what we want him to do. But rather, if we understand who Jesus is and what he's done and what he's still doing on our behalf, the real arrogance would be for us to refuse to come into his presence today. For us to refuse to accept his offer of standing before the Father on our behalf. That's arrogance. Arrogance would be to think that we can do life without him. Arrogance would be to think that we can solve our problems without him. I'm just going to give you just a few moments to kind of lift those challenges up to the Lord and seek his counsel.